Thank you so much for joining us today for our Motherhood Finance event. Quite a lot of you know me in this room, but for those of you who don't, my name's Frankie, and I'm the founder of Frankie's, which is a community for women aimed at opening the conversation around money, and also the founder of a wealth management company called FSWM, where I work with families and professionals on their personal and business financial planning. So hopefully today we're going to have a very interesting discussion regarding motherhood and all things finance, and also some of the legal considerations with modern families, and looking at that and how you can protect yourselves and ensure that you're set up properly for everything that life's got to throw at you. So before I kind of lurch into the questions that I've put together for the panel today, what I thought I'd do is let my wonderful speakers introduce themselves very quickly. So please do keep it to 1 minute each. So if I pass over to Jane initially.
Thank you. So Jane Linge, just recently started up my own consultancy company called Start to Scale, and Frankie is my first client, which is fantastic. I specialise in investment banking, and you'll probably hear a bit about that during this session. And yeah, as a mother of 3 children, obviously this topic is very interesting to me, and hopefully we can share some insights that will be good for you guys today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Chhaya, Prasannan-Nair, a consultant gynecologist and an IVF specialist based at Bourne Hall in Cambridge. So I'm representing Bourne Hall, which you might know is the world's first IVF clinic. So obviously creating families is my field, and that's why I'm here. Lovely to see you.
Hello, I'm Lauren Duffy. I am a director at Linge Financial, which is a startup company. Well, we are a startup company still. We work with startup and scale-up businesses and founders from kind of ideally day one of how they set up their business. We support them. We act as their finance function. We are their finance function. We support at board level. We do all the day-to-day stuff, and it's for businesses really that aren't ready to hire in-house. We can support them in that way. So, yeah, that's what we do.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanie Headon. I head up the international family team at Burkitt's. We have been for a couple of years, a top 50 law firm. And a couple of years ago now, and officially last year, I started our Modern Families initiative. So we have input from not only family law, but also our other teams, because we're a full service firm. So from a kind of trust litigation perspective, from a private client perspective, and also immigration for international modern families issues, such as international surrogacy. So we do offer a holistic legal service. So I do my own practice is a mixture of both children and international finance, so divorce and finances, prenups and postnups, and also the modern families work as well. So quite diverse mix.
Amazing, thank you. So there's only one mic. I'm going to try and shout, and then you guys can pass the mic
too,
between you, because else it feels like we're going to be doing pass the parcel.
I was going to say I talk without a microphone because I feel weird even talking into microphones.
Hopefully everyone will be able to hear us.
Yeah.
So Lauren, I wanted to start with you, because I think that particularly with the change of government, there's been so many changes with regards to the thresholds of income and the types of childcare benefits, etc., and costs that can be shared for individuals and families. So can you tell me a little bit about how people can manage their income to ensure that they can maximise the childcare allowances that they're able to access?
Yeah, so that 100k threshold is very topical, and I'm sure a lot of parents are aware of it. So there's a couple of things that people can do if there's 2 people working in a family at home. If one person earns over 100k, that removes their entitlement to childcare hours, tax-free childcare. So there's a few different things you can do to keep your income below that 100k threshold. You can look at pension contributions. So if you're an employee and your company has a salary sacrifice scheme, you can increase your pension contributions. You can also do personal pension contributions outside of the salary sacrifice scheme as well. Other things you can look at are cycle to work schemes that reduces your gross income, and if your company offers that. You can look at holiday buyback. So you can actually, a lot of companies do it nowadays. You can buy back some holidays and that will reduce your gross income and your adjusted net income, which is what HMRC look at when they're determining if you're eligible. If you're a founder, you can look at delaying some dividends, delaying some bonus payments. But another thing actually is the gift aid deductions. A lot of companies offer the option to do some donations through payroll, whereby that's a gross deduction as well. So there's a few things there that you could do to reduce your 100k, reduce your income below 100k. But the other thing is, when you're applying for this childcare, and I've not done it myself, I'm not a mother, but I believe when you're applying for it, they ask you if you expect to earn over 100k, and for certain people in certain roles, I think that's really hard to know. I've spoken to a few people about this recently, and actually you might say you might be on a salary of 80k with commission, and you might not know. So actually, you might think you won't, and then you do, and so it's I think it's evaluated on a quarterly basis, but it can be a bit of a grey area, but there's a few things to consider there.
Yeah, and I think also it's not just the 100k limit that's affecting the childcare allowance. If you are kind of teetering around or just going ahead, just rising above, you've also got the tax implications of starting to lose your personal allowance as well. So if you are able to make those additional contributions, then it's good to do so. And I think particularly when you have got the childcare outgoings, it really makes a big difference on that. Lauren, could you, we were speaking when we were prepping for this around kind of the statutory maternity pay, and then the kind of enhanced maternity packages that people can get. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between those?
Yeah, so statutory maternity pay is the bare minimum that an employee or an employer can offer. And there are certain eligibility requirements which I can go into, but statutory is the bare minimum required by law. The eligibility requirements are you have to have been with your company for 6 months prior to week 25 of your pregnancy, and you have to have been earning more than £123 per week during the relevant period. And people might have heard what the relevant period is. It's really hard to calculate. I think of it in terms of week 17 to week 24 of your pregnancy. So that's the relevant period. That's really important to ensure that you're earning more than £123 per week to ensure you're eligible for SMP. What SMP actually is it's for the first 6 weeks, it's 90% of your salary. 33 weeks after that, it's £184 per week, or the lower of 90% that, or 90% of your salary. There are ways during the looking at the relevant period, and I think it can get really confusing, and this is probably where a lot of people do lose out. When you look at your relevant period, week 17 to week 24 of your pregnancy, if your average weekly earnings during that period, that's what determines that 90%. So there are ways you can consider trying to maximize what you earn during week 27 to week 17 to week 24. For example, you could speak to your employer about maybe withholding a bonus payment to that period, because that then gets swept up into your average weekly earnings, which determines your 90%. You could look at even possibly, now frankly, I'm sure won't echo this, but deferring some pension pay. If you're paying pension by a salary sacrifice, that reduces your earnings that you will get paid for your statutory maternity pay. So yeah, there's a few things there. Enhanced is like a lot of businesses nowadays, I think it's 67% of businesses do some sort of enhanced, so 33% just do SMP. Enhanced is anything beyond the kind of bare minimum, basically. Sometimes it's a top up, it could be extra leave, but I think the main thing is to make sure it's clarity around the time frame between week 17 to week 24, and ensuring that you meet that threshold and you're kind of maximizing your earnings during that period as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that it's really important as well, particularly when people think about switching jobs and moving, make sure that you're aware of what's in the packages and what you might be leaving behind or gaining somewhere else, and looking in, because all of this stuff kind of forms together in your compensation. Jen, just turning to you, with you've kind of been running massive teams in your previous life. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of how you tackled managing maternity leave and giving support to employees that were in that situation?
Sure. I mean, I don't mind sharing the first time that I went on maternity leave, I actually left the building and burst into tears. The reason for that was I'd spent, my whole adult life in a working environment, and this was what I knew. I knew I was good at it. And I thought, what if I don't like the baby? What if the baby doesn't like me? And so I had a bit of a panic moment. Thankfully, it's all okay. And I've got 3 children now and we get on pretty well. But it was quite a scary time. So I think that, it's really important to have a network. It can be quite isolating as a mother, particularly when the babies are younger. And sometimes you need to rely on that network, especially as they get older, sometimes some of the school runs. So have a good network around you. In terms of maternity leave, I did make sure that we were financially able for me to have that time off. So we did put money aside before I took the maternity leave. But yeah, I think it's more really just looking after yourself, because it's a huge change in your life.
And from a kind of leadership perspective, what do you think you were encouraging? Was there anything in particular you were encouraging your managers and people that were working with you to make sure they were doing during that time to make sure women felt supported?
I think you've been through it yourself. You naturally have that empathy. I was lucky to have some flexibility. When I went back after my first child, I just worked for 3 days a week. Very fortunate to have a good position in the bank on a part-time basis. And for me, that was so important, because then the balance was more with the family than it was with my job. And then as the children got older, I stepped back into it. So I think that it's really important for managers to give that flexibility to people in the workplace. But also, you've got to be mindful of the fact it's not just people with children. Some people don't have children through choice or other. And so, if you are giving that flexibility to working mums, then other people also need that flexibility. It could be caring for an elderly parent. So as a leader, I've always tried to set a good example of showing that my family and home life is important. People know what my life is like outside of work, and making sure that you give that flexibility. And I think that, from a human perspective, that's so important. But from a business perspective, it makes absolute sense, because if you treat people the right way, they remember that, and they're willing to come in and put a lot more back into your company. So for me, that was an important part of leading the team in that respect.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think blended families, Frank, is just one of the kind of, I suppose, family structures that we need to think about, and how best to protect the children of the family kind of moving forwards. I think there can be issues that really don't occur to, people who are embarking upon parenthood, or have fallen into kind of parenthood, I suppose, in another way. And some of those considerations that we discussed kind of beforehand include thinking about trusts. If there are trusts set up historically, decades and decades ago, intended to benefit the family and children of the family, are those trusts set up to deal with modern family structures? And some of the time the answer is no, they're not set up. There's been legislation that has that helped with some of that, in that children who were born outside of a marriage, for example, now fall into the definition of a child for the purpose of a trust. And also there's further legislation that deals with adopted children, because historically there was an issue with children being children who were born outside of a traditional nuclear family being excluded from the class of beneficiaries in these dynastic trusts. So that's changing, but there's still an issue that remains with children that are born by surrogacy. Surrogacy, I mean, the number of applications for a parental order, which is the application that needs to be made in this jurisdiction to formalise a surrogacy arrangement. There's a lacuna between the time when the child is born and the time when legal parenthood is transferred. And so that's a really big consideration for these type of trusts. And there was a case recently involving a BVI trust dealing with that exact issue, that there'd been an international surrogacy arrangement, and whether the child then was in the class of beneficiaries as a result. So it's an evolving issue, and I don't think anytime soon there's going to be a quick fix to that. I think there'll be more litigation in that particular area. The other issue is wills, I think, and thinking about this interim period for children that are born by surrogacy and provision for them. I mean, it's not only the intended parents who are having the baby by a surrogate, it's also the surrogate themselves, because they may fall into a situation where that, you know, if something befalls them once they've had the baby, but legal parenthood hasn't transferred, the surrogate is the legal mother. It's that the legal mother is defined as the person in this jurisdiction who's given birth to the child. So there can be lots of kind of issues which aren't really considered when embarking upon these arrangements. I think a lot of the time, you know, parents to be think, well, we'll go ahead with this, we need some family law advice, but there are lots of other kind of areas of law that feed into this, and employment law is one of them, actually, and making sure, you know, maternity or, you know, paternity or parental leave is set up in the right way, and there's, you know, there's now leave for fertility treatments for some employers that are offering, and so it's I think getting that holistic advice from us or whoever else, you know, at the earliest stage before embarking on those arrangements.
And I think I see this all the time, that people, you know, when we're young, fit, healthy, we don't like to think about bad things happening to us. And often we kick our kind of personal admin and everything down the road. But unfortunately, all the time in our jobs, we also see when people haven't put the right structures in place and something unexpected happens, that it comes out the blue and they don't have what they think they may have. And I think making sure that your kind of will and your children, particularly if you've got children from various different families and maybe you've not got a different approach in what you're thinking they're going to inherit, etc., it's really important that you think about trust structures and making sure that you're very clear with what you want to happen, and always try to imagine yourself not in that you're no longer here. How do you want it to be dealt with? You don't want there to be any kind of grey area or misinterpretation of what you would have wanted, because ultimately death and money do very strange things to people. So having that clarity is really important, particularly if your children are minors as well.
I think the other thing as well, sorry Frankie, is also having, you know, if you're going into a blended family situation, thinking about prenups, postnups, cohabitation agreements, again, just to make sure that there is provision for children, if there are children from both sides or children from one side, that's been thought out. I mean, increasingly I'm seeing lots of, I think the papers rather unkindly call them silver splitters, but, you know, couples that are divorcing at that stage in life, that kind of between 55, 65, and that, you know, it's that time of their lives that they then think, right, we've got adult children, we need to make sure they're provided for. If one of the parents then remarries, and postnups, prenups are a really good way of trying to protect so far as possible the you know, wealth for the next generation, and make sure that those children are dealt with fairly as possible, together with kind of estate planning and trusts.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And Chhaya, from a kind of medical point of view, I think people are having children so much later, and often you don't know kind of whether you can or so. From your side, what can women be doing to if they're starting to think about having a family and starting to get themselves prepped and planned?
That's right, Frankie. So we do see that in, you know, clinical practice, that women are delaying starting their family due to various reasons, you know, because of their career, because of finance, and what we are discussing today, relationships. Family dynamics is also changing a lot. But what we need to kind of be aware is fertility, you know, does reduce or decline after a certain age. And globally, it has been found that the fertility rates have markedly reduced. And so it is being aware of that things do change. So right, you know, from the time of maybe at 30, we would say just be aware that you may need to have a check or some tests, or be aware of whether there would be a problem, you know, in the future. And so that is the trend we're seeing, that women are thinking of starting a family maybe closer to 40. And then there is a very short frame or time frame there where the success rates will be either naturally or assisted conception. And so that's the kind of trend that we're seeing nowadays.
Amazing, thank you. And Lauren, you touched on earlier kind of more of what employed women can be thinking about from a maternity perspective. If you're running your own company, there were some founders in the room today, what sort of things can a business owner be thinking about from a maternity perspective, but also if you've got older children and you're looking at how you can structure your finances?
Yeah, it's I think if you're a founder, you're in a niche position that you can design a HR policy yourself. One thing to be mindful of is a lot of founders, and some people in the room might do it. We work with a lot of men and women who would use this approach in terms of paying themselves as a founder. They'll pay themselves the minimum national insurance kind of threshold, which is £9,100 per annum, which means you don't have to pay national insurance on that, and then the rest of your pay is usually paid through a dividend. If one thing to be mindful of that 9,100 is if you're paying that to yourself evenly throughout the year, that's fine. And if you were to fall pregnant, your relevant period that gets analysed, you'd be earning that 123 that you need to be entitled to SNP. But if you were to hypothetically take that 9,100 salary and pay it in 3 different installments, and that didn't fall during the relevant period, you wouldn't be entitled to your S&P. And I think a lot of probably people fall foul to that because a lot of the policies, and even people haven't been through this, it's super confusing. You don't know what dates to look at. You don't know where to get your information. There is some really good, I found 1 or 2 things online, like Instagram, that actually some of the Instagram pages are better than stuff you read up online. But that's really important because you might rule yourself out of being eligible for S&P. I suppose the other thing is if you're a founder, you can decide when to pay yourself your dividend in terms of your threshold, your 100k threshold. So you can have kind of options around delaying that. But I think that's really the S&P. It's really important that you try and maximize that, and you could fall foul of missing out on it if you don't pay yourself correctly.
And again, one of the benefits of running your own company is that you can kind of control your earnings and income. When we were prepping for this, we were talking about what individuals can be thinking about doing, or founders can be thinking about doing at a later stage. So can you tell us a little bit about when children reach above the age of 13, how they can actually be potentially incorporated into the structure?
I remember speaking about this. So this is something that actually a lot of people probably aren't even aware of, or it's probably not too widely talked about. But as a founder, if you have a child above the age of 13, you can have them do work for your business, casual work, whether it's admin, whether it's marketing, Instagram, emails. Pay them a wage of £123 per week and not put that through payroll, provided they don't have another job. So it's a really interesting strategy in that obviously you get a child in the workplace, you get them doing good work, you get them doing work for you. You can pay them a salary of £123 per week. It's not on payroll. And with that, then you can decide, or the child can decide whether they keep those earnings, they put them into a junior ISA, which I think you'll probably do a much better job of talking about than I will, Frankie. But you could put that money into a junior ISA. The other thing as well with that money is it's not a gift. It doesn't contribute, that's earned income, even though it's not taxable because it's below the threshold, it's earned income. So if you are a founder, if you had a child over the age of 13 and they don't have another job, you can pay them that casual wage off payroll. The important thing is to keep a bit of documentation on it, keep some notes, keep the day you paid them, keep the work they did. But it's an interesting approach it's very much above board and can be used.
Yeah, I think the junior ISA is really interesting point, because if you've got a child who's not yet born or is very young and you'll start making contributions now, even small contributions of £25, £50 a month, and it doesn't just have to be you, it can be grandparents, aunts, godparents, can pay into this. Getting that invested now until they're 18, your likelihood they're going to have a house deposit by the time they reach that age, and it really hasn't kind of had that much of an impact on you to get it to that point. And the other thing that some grandparents or yourselves may want to consider is also a pension. So everybody, even if you're not earning, is able to have a pension. So not just for children, but it also could be if somebody's deciding to take a step back to look after the child, or children for a while. Then obviously you've got the kind of motherhood penalty, as we like to call it, because you haven't got money going into your pension. But the minimum level you can pay into a pension is £2,880 a year. And that gets grossed up automatically by the government to 3,600. So if you are in a position where you can put something in, again, that compound, and I've got some clients who've, particularly for inheritance tax and all the things that are going on at the moment, grandparents have started pensions for their grandchildren. They won't be able to access it, unfortunately, until they're in their late 50s. So I don't think they may be as excited, but they will be by the time they get there, because that's going to be a really, really significant pot that's pretty much set them up for life. And again, it's a small contribution in the grand scheme of things, particularly if you're thinking about your wider planning and trying to not give a big Christmas card to number 11. And I shouldn't really be saying this when it's all being filmed, but anyway, yeah. So Jane, you know, you spent 27 years with a huge job, as we touched on earlier. How did you navigate kind of working at that level and having 3 children and being present?
Honest answer, quite poorly at times. I think that in the early stages of my career, so I worked part-time, I definitely had a good work-life balance. It was much easier. Very fortunate to have both sets of grandparents on hand. So we were lucky to lean on them when I needed to. As the job became more demanding, lots of travel involved, long hours, etc. My husband has also got a flexible job. That helped. He could do the school runs when I couldn't. So that kind of physical support and network was really important. But I found as the job got bigger and bigger and more demands are placed on me, I think my problem, and maybe a lot of other people as well, particularly women, is I didn't want to say no to anything. You know, there's a new team, you take it, there's a new product, would you take that on? And I was always yes, yes, yes. Because I thought, you know, women have fought hard to get to this position. And what I didn't want to do is kind of damage that reputation that a woman with 3 children and family has to say no to things. So I think that I should have put more boundaries in place. Looking back now, I should have been a bit more disciplined, because I allowed, it gradually crept in, but I allowed my work to be my primary focus. And it did, that work came before the family quite often. And I think at work, quite often it's, you know, the demands are urgent. You know, you need to read this report now, you need to attend this meeting. I was told on a Friday, you know, we've got an important meeting in the Netherlands on Monday. You know, I had to be there. So drop the plans over the weekend, fly over. Because my children weren't making noise about me doing it. So what I was doing was focusing on the urgent stuff, because if I didn't do that, I'd kind of be in trouble or it wouldn't look good. What I wasn't focusing on was the important stuff. Being present for the children physically, but also emotionally, sitting down, doing some homework with them, asking how their day was at school. And I think that, you know, this is why I took that decision to leave the job, because that balance just wasn't there anymore. It shifted so dramatically. And I thought, I'm now 50, well, now, but I was 50 when I made the decision. My kids are getting older. My eldest is about to go to uni, and I've missed out on a lot. So I didn't always navigate very well. So I think if I had my time again, I'd be a bit more disciplined with putting those boundaries in place, and also being brave enough to say, I have a family and I can't do this right now, because that's more important.
I think someone in the midst of all of this, Jane, I think that's really an important message, because I think you do sometimes lose focus, don't you, on the small things that you're missing out on when you're prioritising one.
And it's funny, isn't it? It's that obviously I don't have children, but it's actually a short time. They seem to grow up so quickly that it's it's difficult to navigate. Thank you for that, Jane. Chhaya, for those of us in the room who maybe don't have children yet, there's lots of confusion around kind of different routes to pregnancy. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the routes and break down those misconceptions for us?
Yeah, so 1 in 6 couples do struggle to conceive naturally and approach clinics for tests, and then we advise them about different routes of achieving motherhood. Um, so if there are problems, from the 30% of cases would be down to the woman, 30% could be down to the man, or it could be a combined factor, both of them. So depending on what the reason is, there are options to use. Obviously, if it's unexplained, then the most common route would be going down the route of IVF as a assisted conception. But there is the option of using donors, so egg donors or sperm donors, or even as an embryo donors. So there are couples who would be altruistic donors, or they would be sharing eggs or sperms, and which is a generous offer from couples to help families being created. But the important thing to consider is that finding out the cause of it and what we can do. Um, Important as well for women to consider, if they're not in the circumstances that they can be able to start a family straight away, think about egg freezing. That's something which is coming in quite a lot. And corporate companies are financing and funding for that. And I think that's important to look at as well. The other way of achieving motherhood is via surrogacy. So we do get male couples, or even same-sex female couples, or single women, and surrogacy is another route of going down for achieving pregnancy.
Perfect, thank you. And Jen, when we were getting organised for this, you were mentioning around when couples unfortunately split up, but maybe they've gone down a kind of embryo or egg freezing route. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and some of the cases you're seeing with that?
Yeah, I'm increasingly seeing that couples are separating. They've gone through IVF, they've created embryos, they've used some of those embryos sometimes successfully, they've got children, they've still got some embryos in storage. They've then sadly separated, and the question then is what happens to the embryos? And it's such an emotive subject, as you can understand, because I think sometimes you see a couple where one party is quite kind of flippant almost about what happens to the frozen embryos, whereas to someone else it's their chance, I think, probably of parenthood again, or maybe their only chance of parenthood again. So it can be a really emotive subject. The courts in this jurisdiction, they don't deal really with what should happen to frozen embryos on separation and divorce, because they are not treated as matrimonial property, which is a horrible kind of way of looking at it, but rightly they're not treated as matrimonial property. So the courts stay out really of that argument. But what happens? Embryos, they can be stored now. The law changed relatively recently. They can be stored for up to 55 years if both parties, the consents are renewed every 10 years. So what can happen though is one of the parties is able to withdraw their consent at any time after the frozen embryos are stored. And then what that triggers then is a 12-month cooling off period to see whether both of the parties, or one of the parties who's kind of withdrawn their consent, changes their mind. And if they don't, then after that 12-month period, the embryo is then destroyed. I don't know what the best way, what would you say? Lawyers, we say destroy, but it seems like such a harsh term.
We say allowed to perish.
Allowed to perish, so there we are. And this is why we have you here, to soften my lawyer speak. It's really a very emotive issue, and increasingly I'm seeing couples wanting to deal with the issue of frozen embryos in prenup negotiations, and also in negotiations in terms of divorce, what should happen to them. So when it comes to prenups, again, prenups generally are not legally binding in this jurisdiction at the moment anyway, which is something that I think we all sometimes forget, and the press sometimes forgets. But when it comes to the treatment of frozen embryos, it can be good to have that discussion up front, so to kind of preempt there being an issue later on. But again, it's not binding, it's just an indication of what the parties had agreed at the time may be the right thing to do. So it can be helpful, and I think it's always helpful to have those discussions, and really you do anyway as part of the consent process. So it's there's not really any definitive way to protect them in terms of one party, there's disagreement between the parties. But one of the things we'd suggest is mediation, for example, just to talk about it. Because one party, as I say, may be really quite dismissive of the importance of those frozen embryos and what should happen to them. Whereas the other party, it's everything to them. So it's really important they hear each other.
Yeah. Just one more question from me, and then I'm going to open to the floor. Lauren, you were talking about kind of the importance of kit days for women, particularly if you've got a period of time when that you're off. Can you tell us a little bit more about these and
Yes.
how important they are?
Yeah, they are very important. So, people have probably heard of them, kid days, keeping in touch days. So everyone is entitled to 10 kid days when they're on maternity leave, and your employer cannot force you to do them, but you can agree with your employer to do them, and most employers are very happy to oblige. They typically are paid at your normal salary rate, which is amazing because you might be on S&P and you get a couple of days extra full pay. And it's not legal, or it's not, your employer isn't legally obliged to pay you your normal wage, but typically we'd see that they do. And I think they're really good days to use because, one, obviously from a finance perspective, you get full pay. Obviously you get taxed on that, but you get your full pay and you have your tax credits. But as well as that, it's a really good way to, it's in the name, keep in touch with the business. It'll probably make going back easier. I think it's a nice option for people to use from a cash perspective, and also from kind of maintaining relationships in the business if your plan is to go back. And the other thing I think to note, we might not get to it, but I think it's important that everyone knows probably you accrue your annual leave on maternity leave. And an approach that we'd see a lot of people doing is when coming back from maternity leave, you could do a 4 or 3 day week for the first couple months with all of the leave you've accrued. If you were thinking of going down to a 3 or 4 day work week, you could use that leave that you've accrued. You can never lose that, so it's yours. You could use that leave that you've accrued while on maternity and go back maybe down to a 4 day week and see how that works. You can do a 3 day week. So I think a lot of the stuff around maternity, I've seen a few employers do it recently with like an maternity leave handbook. As I said, it's super confusing. No one knows where to go, what to do. There's different bits of information online. I think if employers could do more in the way of making policies clear about what women and men for maternity leave and paternity leave need to do and when, I actually think it would, massively
Make things a
benefit
lot
people.
clearer.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. Did anyone have any questions for anyone on the panel? Yes, lady over here.
I have a question for you, Laura. If somebody is employed and entitled to statutory, but then also a significant portion of their income is from just self-employed work, how does that then work? Do you just have to take the employers and then you lose your self-employed kind of amounts, or?
No, do you mean self-employed, as in you're working through, so
As in, you've got a side hustle and you're self-employed.
Yeah.
Not the
So
employment.
that will continue as normal. So you'll do your self-assessment tax return at the end of the year. You can still get your SNP, and provided, depending on how you structure it, you're entitled to SNP if you have paid yourself a minimum of £123. I don't know if you have yourself on any payroll or are you just self-employed. Okay, so you're probably not that. You may not be entitled to SNP. So
But you would be through your employer.
through your employer, you
So
would
if
be.
get that, I'm just wondering if you get anything extra, because if you've been relying on that additional income from your self-employed work.
So there is the maternity allowance, and that's similar to S&P, but it's paid directly from the Department of Work and Pensions. And I think that there is some scope. I'm not 100% sure of the answer to that, but I think there is some scope to get some additional support if you have been self-employed, because your main source of income then is the employment, yeah. So let me, I'm trying to fully, I'm not 100% sure.
It's a complicated question.
No, it's actually not.
We can come back to you for sure on
What I can do is, if you want to give me your email, and even because as I said, there's so many niche questions with all, everyone has different timing. Do they have self-employment? Are they a contractor? So I'm happy to answer any questions. If people want to give me an email as well, I can give that, and happy to answer any questions, because all the specifics of this, the dates, the timing of the end of the tax year, all of it is really important. So I'm happy if you want to put anything in writing.
Perfect. Millie?
With the £123 per week that you referred to in the case of your own children, I just wondered if there's anything you can do if you're like paying babysitter with that, because I mean, we've got a regular babysitter who probably works for us like once a week, and she's 16.
Yeah.
So I'm just intrigued as to whether my husband can pay her through his business. If that was a
Yeah.
but it might be like a
Yeah, the thing I can think of there, you can't pay a babysitter through a business. You need to be really careful.
oh, so it needs to be associated with business.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what with the 123 thing? So say if you were to have if you had a child and you've got them doing a bit of casual work, whatever it is, checking emails, checking Instagram for the business,
Yeah.
you could pay that child 123 pounds per week. You could put that in a bank account and agree between you and the child what to do with that.
Right.
You could decide with that to give it to the child and they can spend the money. You could decide to put it in an ISAB. You could decide we're going to get a babysitter and pay the babysitter from that cash. So
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, I would say on that, it's a lesser, it's above board. But the thing with it is just keep a bit of documentation on it. Keep an Excel with when you paid the child. Did they check Instagram? Did they send an email? What did they do? But that's something you can't do.
Perfect. Lady at the back?
For the accrued holiday time while you're on that leave, is there a time frame that you'd be able to use that by?
No.
There isn't.
No, you never lose that. And if you,
Plan to use it.
Yes.
this year.
Yeah. You don't lose that. So when you accrue holiday, you accrue that and that's yours. So if you were to leave the business, you would get, like you do with any other accrued holidays, payment in lieu of holiday, you get paid out.
But can I also carry it over?
Yes.
To the next one?
You can carry it forward, you'll never lose it. If you leave, you can use it indefinitely. It's yours. You can, when you're on maternity leave, you lose it. And if you were to leave the business with 30 days holidays, you'd have to get that paid out.
Even if they don't have a payout policy?
Ooh, very good question. But I suppose actually there are some employers that would say you have to use a certain minimum amount. It would depend on what's written into your contract, because obviously from a health and wellbeing perspective, a lot of employers don't let you carry forward more than 5 days. So a lot of employers will have that. But,
We have a no payout policy.
oh, do you? I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ours is a bit.
Yeah, I've not heard of. I've only ever seen. Now I'm sure you're not the only one, but I've only ever seen payment in lieu of you get paid out any accrued holidays.
Okay.
Provided you're in line with the carry forward policy, which in most places you can only carry forward 5 days. But on maternity leave, that's an exception. You're entitled to carry forward those days.
You should.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, it's a question about sort of the legality around IVF and embryos. Given everything that you said about prenups in this jurisdiction not standing up, what can you actually do to protect both parties going into that scenario if the worst happens, break up or there's death or anything like that, to ensure that both of your wishes in the current state are respected in the future?
I think you, like I said, you can't really protect them 100%. But I think the best way to deal with that, and I know that you have to go through a counselling process, don't you, before you start? I mean, you can
That's
probably
right.
speak a little bit
Yeah.
more about that, Joe.
So any couple coming through for assisted conception, we do counsel them. And there are certain the consent forms that pertain to in what happens to the embryos in case of death or mental incapacity. So they already make a plan, so whether their partners can use the embryos, for example. And if that is signed, then it's not an issue when it comes to that. So that would be an important discussion that happens right at the start of treatment. Yeah.
So yeah, posthumous use of embryos is another, we haven't got time to talk about that today, but that's another issue, as you say, that's dealt with as part of the consent
Yeah.
process.
from my perspective, it probably would be having those open and honest conversations and recording them in some way. And one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about is something that is a kind of emerging from the US, which is the idea of baby nut. So it's before you have a baby, talking about all of the important things when it comes to how you want to bring up the child, education, religion, you know, what their arrangements will be, where they're going to live. It's intended they'll live in this jurisdiction or another jurisdiction. So you can have all of those conversations up front and record them again, not binding, but really important to show intention at the time. How, I mean, that can be some of the issues when things, I mean, I see things most of all when they go wrong, to be frank with you. And what is often helpful is, well, what were your intentions at the time? How did you go into this process? And that's why prenups, although not binding, that there's, you know, increasing the decision making through the course of the moment, and the line of authorities is that they will be upheld on the basis that a certain kind of number of factors are complied with, which I won't go through today. But, I mean, independent legal advice, disclosure, and various other factors. So when it comes to those discussions, I think my advice to clients always is have those open and frank discussions, because you'd be amazed about the number of people that going into a marriage, into a cohabiting relationship, that haven't had really, really important discussions. And mediation can really help to facilitate that. It doesn't need to be when, you know, a marriage is breaking down or a relationship's breaking down. It can be when you're going into this partnership and deciding how things are going to be and what will happen in the event that there is a separation further down the road, because statistics indicate that is something that we all would need to contemplate, sadly. So I just to go back to your question, I don't think there's a way that you can absolutely future-proof that, but in my personal experience, the more conversations that are had up front, the easier then things are when it comes, or if the time comes to separation later down the track.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If anyone else has got any, we'll do one more or two more, and then we'll ask. We'll be mingling around if anyone wants to ask anything specifically. But yeah, over to you.
Thank you. So you talked about S&P and the importance of keeping your salary at 100K. Do you touch on whether that's the same and if there are any associated benefits more than $2%?
So your paternity, we have statutory paternity pay as well. So fathers are entitled to 2 weeks paternity leave, which obviously is not great. But you, in terms of the 100K threshold, it's based on your household. So if either one of you is above that 100K, you lose the eligibility. You no longer have the eligibility for those childcare hours. You do still get those 15 childcare hours for 3 and 4 year olds, regardless of your household income. But for the most part, if either of your income in the household goes above 100K, you lose the 33 childcare hours and the tax-free childcare 20% top up. So yeah, in terms of a father in this situation, they do have the 2 weeks paternity leave, which is statutory, but a lot of places nowadays are trying to become more progressive and improve those policies. But I still think from what I'm seeing, it's not great. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I can ask my name, if that's easier.
No, just
So it's about the 100K cap, and actually what happens if you surpass that in the middle of the year unexpectedly? It's my company does promotions and salary increases in June, helpfully, and really useful. So what happens if you actually end up in a new job or a massive promotion at that point in time?
Yeah.
Does that kind of retroactively affect, you don't have to pay anything back, or do you switch from that month?
So again, I haven't gone through it myself, but I've spoken to people who have. You apply every quarter. Your eligibility is determined every quarter based on your expected income. I have heard more than one stories whereby income has gone above 100K after selecting no, and it just gets missed. So, and then but now again, the right thing to do is, if you do expect your income to be above 100K, and
through self-assessment, quite like with HMRC, you'll always get tax code changes. Everyone probably gets different notifications here. Like they do pick up on things, but from what I'm, in my experience in it, and from what I hear, it doesn't get corrected retrospectively. You apply every quarter, your eligibility is determined every quarter. So for your June pay rise, whenever the next application would be, you might decide actually the right thing to do is tick the box. It probably will be over, or
And is there sort of, maybe this is a question for you, Frankie, as well, but is there a general rule of thumb or sort of like an algorithm that you can use to say, oh, if I've hit this much, then actually I should just stop worrying about squirrelling money away. I should just take the hit and pay for childcare. Or is that just case by case and God knows all?
it's really interesting. So I have something that I read on this is really interesting, then I'll let you jump in. Your income doesn't recover if you have 2 children, if you're both earning over 100k, or if you're both earning 100k, 2 children in childcare full time, your income doesn't recover until you both reach 136k. With through paying for the childcare for 40 hours, 37.5 hours a week. So if you're on 100k, or someone's on 99k, it's a huge difference. Again, some of that is kind of, there's a lot probably thrown in there, but I've heard that and I think it's probably not far from the truth. I don't know, do you have a view on that?
I think that one of the hardest things is that you can't access pensions until you're 57 at the moment. So as much as this is a really good way to get your income down, you've got to get a balance between putting a lot of money into pensions and then hoping that you make it to that stage. I hope everyone here does, that you can access it. But, you know, my mum passed away when she was 52, and that all the money that's in her pensions, went straight to my dad, who's I'm sure having a great time with it. But she didn't get to enjoy the money that she was putting away. And because it's not accessible, it's really important to think about your family, because the tax and all of these things, it is a way up, and don't always allow that to be the driver. But I think just also to add to your question, Drew, it's thinking about, similar to what we were doing last week, playing around with pension contributions mid-year, and working out what you can put in if you do see a sudden jump up, but always kind of balancing with, actually, is it going to be better to be taxed a bit more but have more flexibility and get my money to work in other ways, over just pushing all my money into the pension? Is a difficult choice, but it's definitely worth consideration. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you to my panelists.